Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Matthew Patton. I'm the CEO here at Cutler Investment Group, and we're excited to bring the third in our cybercrime series. Today is going to be a Whodonit, true cybercrime. Jessica Alvarez with our compliance team is once again leading this presentation. Thank you all for coming. We're not going to do questions and answers today, so if you do have a question afterwards, Jessica will share her contact information or reach out to your advisor and they will be happy to help you to answer any questions you might have. Jessica, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks, Matt,
so
you've
got some stories for us today.
I do. I've got 3 stories for everybody today, and I found them very informative and interesting, and I hope everyone else does too.
I'm sure they will. Let's get to it.
Okay. Well, again, hello and welcome, everybody. Thank you for tuning in, and I really hope that you enjoyed this presentation. First here is, of course, our lovely disclosure language that I've got to put up. And now on to the meat. So like Matt said, for today's presentation, I'm taking a slightly different approach and we'll be telling 3 cybercrime stories that happened to real people just in the last few years. Since my last few presentations had focused on tips and tricks on how to avoid attacks or steps to take if you had been a victim of cybercrime, I thought I would contextualize all of that information into real-world scenarios to make it a little more meaningful. But before I get to the stories, I want to give some updated facts and figures about cybercrime so we have a foundation for what we're dealing with. And the first one here is that humans are the top target for cybercriminals. It used to be easier and more lucrative for hackers to attack a specific machine or business to get their payload, but because people are moving their lives and in turn their personal information online more and more each year, we have consequently made ourselves a huge target for these criminals. The facts are that there are about 3.8 billion internet users today, and that's up from just 2 billion in 2015, and it's estimated that that number will grow to 6 billion by 2022. So essentially, we're just flooding the market with more targets for hackers, so we need to be more diligent in protecting ourselves now more than ever. The second thing here is cybercrime damage costs are predicted to hit $6 trillion annually by 2021. Think about that. It's going to cost $6 trillion in damages each year, and it's estimated that a single attack will, on average, cost about $150 million as more businesses link their infrastructures digitally. These numbers aren't that hard to imagine. I mean, the news just broke last week that Uber paid a ransom of $100,000 to hackers last year to recover information stolen about their drivers and users. So it is likely that $100,000 is now the floor for attacks like these. And in 2016 alone, cybercrime damage costs were around $3 trillion, which is already larger than the size of the global trade of all illegal drugs combined, which is currently at around $500 billion. And just to get a little more granular here about personal records being stolen, since I know that that is probably a topic on everyone's mind given the Experian data breach earlier this year, along with several other companies that have reported leaks. Since 2013, there are 3,809,448 records stolen from breaches every day. That's 158,727 per hour, 2,645 per minute, and every 44 seconds of every single day, somebody's personal record is stolen. So, okay, now that I have your attention with the facts, let's get to the stories. And I want to preface that these stories happen to real people who were fairly tech savvy and knew at least the basics of cybersecurity training, and they still managed to fall victim to these criminals. So I just want to emphasize the point that this type of crime is ever changing and evolving, so it is important to keep abreast of the latest trends and threats in the industry. But of course, all of you already know that since you're tuned into this webinar. So let's get started with our first story here, and it is called Bad Keystroke of Luck. This happened to a woman named Sandra, who is a human resources professional in Phoenix. And a little background about her is she has used her computer at work every day for the last 15 years. All of the updates and maintenance to her programs and operating systems are controlled by her firm's IT department, and she's never had a problem with security. And her IT department even sends out periodic emails to her employees letting them know about any pertinent cybersecurity risks and what the employees can do to avoid them. And Sandra also has a computer at home, but she usually only uses it to, check her personal bank account occasionally, keep up with family and friends on social media, and make travel arrangements. But for all other internet-related things, she mostly uses her phone or her computer at work. So one day, Sandra's IT department sent out a notice of a vulnerability within the Internet Explorer browser that they were releasing an emergency critical installment patch that very same day. So this seemed pretty important, and since Sandra uses Internet Explorer on her home computer as well, she wanted to make sure that it was protected too. So when she got home, she did a little more research to find articles about the vulnerability to see if it did affect her computer and then what she could do about it if so. So she ended up finding a really informative article about the bug, and at the end of this article, it offered a patch for the vulnerability to be installed on her computer right then and there. But, however, Sandra knew better than to download things from articles, so she declined to install the patch from that article and instead went to the official Microsoft site to install the patch from there. Seems pretty reasonable, right? She used her cybersecurity training and knowledge to gain more information about the vulnerability. She didn't install the patch from the article, and then she went to the real Microsoft site to get the patch. Well, unfortunately, the article that she had been reading about the vulnerability, the one that offered the patch download, that article was actually created by a hacker and was taking advantage of the fact that Sandra's computer did have the vulnerability. So when she was clicking no to decline the patch installation, the site was actually installing what's called a keystroke logger program on Sandra's computer that went undetected by her and her antivirus program. So what this program did was start recording every single keystroke that she made from then on and sent it straight to the hacker. So even though she did install the correct patch from the Microsoft site, it was already too late since this hacker was able to infiltrate the system before the patch was installed. So that night, after Sandra installed the correct patch from Microsoft, she happened to log into her bank account to check her balance. And in doing so, she was unknowingly sending all of her login information straight into the hands of the cybercriminal. Her antivirus program did end up detecting this keystroke logger program later that week when it did its weekly scan, but the damage had already been done. The hacker was able to use her login information to gain access to her bank account and drain it almost completely. Now, once she discovered what had happened, she explained the situation to her bank, who was able to refund her account, and then they escalated it to their own cyber fraud division. But it still caused a hassle and a headache for Sandra, who then had to go through all of these steps to unwind everything that happened and then protect herself from future attacks. So now, what could Sandra have done to avoid this situation? The truth is not a lot. She even did a lot of things right. And it's also assumed that she must have had different passwords for all of her logins since the hacker was only able to get into her bank account after she logged in that night. If she had used that same password from her bank account for other sites, then the hacker would have been able to get into those sites as well. Maybe she could have had a stronger antivirus program on her computer, one that possibly could have detected the keystroke program as it was being secretly installed. But even then, some of these malicious programs are going undetected by even the strongest antivirus software out there. My suggestion for Sandra would be for her to have manually run her antivirus scan right after she had installed the vulnerability patch from the Microsoft site. That way the program would have been caught and removed before it had a chance to do any damage. But other than that, we can't really fault Sandra for her actions since she was simply a victim of this ever-increasing problem. So that was our first story. The second one is called crypto ransom, and it is about a fish attack. And if you've listened to my other cybersecurity presentations, you've heard me talk about phishing attacks and what is called spear phishing, which is a personalized, targeted attack tailored specifically for you. And I've talked about how good the hackers are getting at making these emails look really realistic. And this one happened to a man named Larry, and he's a retired high school teacher in Sacramento. Now, Larry considers himself to be pretty adept at computers, and he uses his home computer a lot. He checks his email multiple times a day, he does a lot of online shopping, and he's even started his own cooking blog. So one day, Larry went to his computer to make another entry to his blog, and he got a pop-up notice that said, "Your files are encrypted. To get the key to decrypt your files, you must pay $500. So Larry quickly X'd out of the warning and tried to access his files, but discovered that the message seemed to be true. There was a little padlock icon on all of his files, and each time he tried to click to open one, the same message popped up. So Larry took the message more seriously this time and read through the rest of it. It said that if he failed to pay within the week, then the ransom would go up to $1,000, and if he failed to pay after the second week, the decryption key would be gone and all of his files would be lost forever. Yes, it seemed that Larry was the latest victim of what's called the crypto wall ransomware attack. He quickly tried to remember when the last time he backed up his files was, but he couldn't remember. He did know that he kept getting an annoying warning every couple weeks or so that he hadn't backed up his computer in 12 months, and then it was recommending that he do so now, but he always clicked the later option on that and figured that he'd get to it one day. But in Larry's case, later was a little too late. So Larry contemplated the effect of losing all of his files. He knew that he was diligent about keeping records of his tax returns, receipts, payroll stubs, blog entries. He had also recently spent a long time digitizing his family photo albums so that he could have easier access to them. And all of those files would be gone if he failed to pay the hackers. So he went online to read more about the attack and discovered that there wasn't much he could do about it. There were no reports of anyone being able to unlock the files without the decryption key, and many people who didn't pay the ransom ended up losing all of their files as the threat had warned. He read that he could file a complaint with what's called the Internet Crime Complaint Center, which is a joint force of the FBI and the White Collar Crime Center. But then that would just be added to a long list of other complaints, and maybe it would help them find these criminals somewhere down the road, but in the meantime, he would still lose all of his files. So he read that a lot of people ended up paying the small ransom amounts, and so that's what he decided to do. And at the end of the ransom message that popped up on his computer, there were instructions on how to pay the ransom, and of course it had to be in Bitcoins. So I'll spare you the details of everything that's involved in facilitating a Bitcoin transaction, but let's just say it was not as easy as the one-click checkout from Amazon. But luckily, being adept at computers, Larry was able to figure this out. And a day after his account had been credited, the files were unlocked and all was as well as it could be. So after everything had settled down, Larry went on the hunt to try to figure out just how he had become a victim of this attack. And he ended up tracking it down to an email he received from his bank the day before his files went on lockdown. At the time he received the email, he didn't think anything of it because he had just checked his account online that week, and the bank's website asked him to verify his contact information, including his cell phone number and his email address. Well, it just so happened that the hacker sent Larry an email that looked identical to the real emails he received from his bank, except for this one included an attachment which was promoting the food drive that the bank was putting on for the holiday season. So Larry clicked on the attachment, but nothing happened, or so it seemed to him. And he thought that just the bank had made a mistake in their email blast, so he went about his day. He didn't notice that one by one his files started having the padlock icon on them, and then by the time he came back to his computer the next day, the program had locked every single file. So the same thing in Sandra's case. I'm not going to chastise Larry for falling for this trick and opening the attachment, I'm just going to remind everyone that it doesn't hurt to take an extra 10 seconds to really look at the emails you receive from companies and even from individuals, because hackers are getting really good at mimicking legitimate emails. And be especially cautious if the email contains a link or attachment, because those are usually where the malicious programs are hidden. So that's what happened to Larry. Our third story, called Hack Attack, is one that I'm very familiar with since it happened recently, within the past month actually, to a couple of our clients. So a little insight into the day-to-day operations at Cutler. One of the first things we all do when we get into the office is log into our custodial advisor sites to check any overnight activity. And one of the notices that we get from the Schwab site is when any client is trading or moving money into or out of their account. So I had logged onto the site as usual, and I saw that there was a client-initiated trade alert from a client who I had just spoken with the other day, and one that I knew wouldn't normally go into her online account and submit a trade herself. So I checked the trade and then called the client just to make sure this was a real request, because it seemed out of the norm. However, when I talked to her, she said she had not logged into her Schwab Alliance account since June and definitely did not make that trade. Okay, initiate fraud protocol on my end is what I was thinking. So I immediately called Schwab to cancel the trade, put a freeze on her Schwab Alliance account, and contacted Schwab's fraud department to let them know about the incident. Now, luckily, Schwab and Cutler both have robust cybersecurity policies and procedures in place to protect our clients from incidents like this. And we were able to detect the fraud immediately and take action before anything happened. But that does not take away from the fact that our client had been hacked. In fact, we ended up getting a similar notice for another client just a week after this one occurred, where the same type of thing happened. We got a client-initiated alert that seemed out of the ordinary, called the client to check on it, and ended up being fraudulent. And these are not isolated incidents with Schwab accounts. When we talked to their fraud department, they informed us that they are getting thousands of attempted fraudulent transaction reports like this per week. And they're continually hiring customer service representatives in their fraud department, and they've even hired the former head of the FBI's Cyber Defense Division to head their own cybersecurity department. So they've seen the numbers that are coming out on hacks, and they're being proactive and doing everything they can to protect your assets. But getting back to the stories, in both of these incidents, after we confirmed that it was indeed attempted fraud in both of their accounts, in addition to recommending that they both run antivirus scans on their computers, change all of their passwords, and check any other financial or personal information accounts that they may have, we cloned their accounts to give them new account numbers, and we changed their Schwab Alliance login settings to view only, which means they can't trade or move money into or out of their account online, which is something that we actually recommend for most of our clients for their protection, which, as you can see from these two stories, would come in handy. So if you have any questions about this or would like us to put this view-only setting on your Schwab account, please call us. All right, so those are our stories. And now usually in a truly good crime story, we get to find out who really did it. However, unfortunately, in this case, we just don't have that information. And even in the last story, the Schwab one, we still aren't really sure how the hackers even gained access to the client Schwab Alliance logins. Did they have access to their email address and were able to get at the login information that way? Did they purchase their login information on the dark web from another hacker who had already stolen it from another data breach? The thing is, we just don't know. Just that we do know is that cybercrime is on the rise, and it's coming from a number of different sources. But what can we learn from these stories? Well, in Sandra's case, she had a lot of the correct cybersecurity measures in place. She had an antivirus program that was set to scan automatically each week, and she did not use the same password from her bank login for other sites. She went directly to the official Microsoft site to install a vulnerability patch from there instead of the one from the article. But she should have manually run her antivirus scan right after she installed that correct patch. And in Larry's case, he did verify that his contact information was correct with his bank site earlier that week, which is always a good idea to keep your contact information updated. So Larry gets kudos for that one. However, he should have been a little more diligent in scrutinizing the email that he received from his bank, which we know was actually the hacker, and he should not have opened the attachment. And in the cases of our clients at Schwab, as you can see, we have a lot of defense measures in place for your protection. And we, as well as Schwab, are continually training our employees in cybersecurity and making sure we're updated on the latest trends. But we can only do so much on our end, and it is up to you to make sure that your home computers are secure. Things like making sure you have an antivirus program that is set to run scans automatically, at least weekly, and making sure you use different passwords for each login that you have. Or better yet, use a password manager. And I've gone through a lot of these other measures in detail in my other presentations. So if you've missed those or wanted to watch them again to refresh your memory, they're up on our website, Cutler.com, and you would click on the commentary section in the upper right-hand corner and then scroll through to find the presentations. They're called Cybersecurity Best Practices and Protecting Your Identity, Data, and Assets. And we will be finalizing our 2018 schedule of events and webinars later this month, so be sure to check back on the website to see what we are offering next year. Again, thank you for tuning in today and taking this important step in protecting yourself from cyber attacks. And just to bring it all home and really hammer in how important this is, let's see here. We have been listening to this presentation for about 22 minutes. So that means that in that time, about 60,000 personal records have been stolen by cyber criminals just while you were listening to this presentation. So I hope you found this informative, and as always, if you have any questions that I didn't answer on this presentation, you can reach out to me directly at jessica@cutler.com, call our phone numbers, or reach out to your advisor and let me know what you have for me.
All right, thank you, Jessica. So 60,000 have been stolen during your presentation. That's a good reminder that I need to go log in and check my accounts at this point. Thank you, everybody, for coming. We appreciate you joining us for Jessica's presentation. This concludes today's presentation, but we look forward to having you to one of our future presentations on cybersecurity or one of the various webinars that we have presented over the last year and will present in the future. Thank you very much for coming, and have a great week.